This is Unit 10, Rational Exponents, Day 1. Before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about some vocabulary words that I'm going to be saying quite a bit throughout this video. First of all, this symbol here is called a radical. A lot of my students like to call it a square root symbol, but it's not always going to be a square root. Square root would be like two numbers being multiplied together to get another number, or the opposite of that, I should say. Where it's not always actually going to be that. And that is dependent upon our index, which is our symbol listed right here. If there was a 3 there, that would mean you're taking, basically it's the answer to a multiplying 3 times the same number. So 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. So the third root of 8 would equal 2. So that number basically just tells you how many times those numbers are being multiplied together. Like, for example, this one would be 2 times 2 times 2 to get 8. That's why that 3 is listed there. If there was 4 of them, then you would be multiplying 2 by itself 4 times, and so on. And then the last thing is the whatever's under your radical, whatever is under that symbol, is called your radicand. So in this case, A is just my radicand. That's under the radical symbol. Okay, so we are just going to be converting basically in these first couple lessons, converting from exponent form to radical form. I've got the first one already done for us, and as you can see, the n is on the denominator of my fraction exponent, and it's also the index. So that's where that would go, and then my numerator is an exponent inside the radicand as well. So for the next one, if we had m and n, it would look like this. A would be inside my radical. This is how I always start. My denominator would go as my index, which would mean it goes right there. And then my m is my numerator, and that therefore it makes it my exponent for my a value inside the radicand. Okay, so we're just working on that, converting that. So I would take a minute to write that down and make sure you've got that. We're just figuring out locations right now. One more thing we need to talk about, it says what is the index on this one? So there's not a number listed right here, but there could be. If you don't see a number there, we are just going to assume that it is a 2. And what a 2 means is that would be a square root. So if you don't see it, that's a square root, and you can assume that a 2 would be there. One more thing, everything in parentheses is considered to be the radicand. So in this case, since 1/2 is touching our parentheses, everything inside the parentheses would be going under as the radicand. Okay, so these are going to go pretty quickly. We're just converting here. It says convert to radical form, then simplify. I will just kind of go through these pretty quick. So b would be the inside. 3 is my denominator, that's my index, and 1 is my exponent, but we don't even really need to write the 1 because b to the first power is just b anyway, so I would leave it like that. Next one, since it's in parentheses, I would put a and b inside, a and b both inside the radicand, as the radicand, and then 3 would be my index because that's the denominator, and then a 1, basically that 1 is going for both of those, so they both would have it as an exponent, but we don't, again, need to show those exponents of 1. For this one, now that 1/3 is really only touching the b, there's no parentheses here, so a is just going to sit out front. We'll have our radical with b in it, only b. 3 will be our index, and 1, again, would be our exponent that we don't need to show. For the next one, 2 would be out front. Inside my radical symbol, there is an x, and then I will put the 3 as my index and 2 as my exponent. Again, that 2 is not being touched by the 2/3. That's why I didn't put it under the radical. Next one, now we have it in parentheses. That means everything is going to be going under the radical, so the 2 and the x. The 3, again, would be my index. And now that 2 is going to go in as an exponent, but we've got to remember that 2 is affecting both of those separately. So I'm going to put a 2 for both of them. So that would be 2 squared and x squared. And then I realized that I can actually simplify 2 squared to a 4, so I'm going to actually write my full simplified answer next. So the third root of 4 times x to the second power. That's what it looks like, and that's how you would say it. All right, next one. First of all, my radical symbol. What's all being touched? Just the y. So the 3 and the x both will just be out front. The y will be inside. The 2 would go there and the 1 would go there, but I do not need the 1 as my exponent, and I also don't even need the 2 because we can just assume it's there if it's not shown. So that would be a square root. Basically, the 1/2 exponent just means the square root. So, okay, next. Number 3. For number 3 here, that 3 is not being touched, so it's not going to be put under the radical. X and y are both going to go under the radical. The 2 would be my index, and the 1s would be my exponents, but I don't need any of those. We can assume that they're there, even if they're not shown. Moving on. M and n are both under. 4 would be my index. 3 would be my exponents. And I do need all of those, but I think I could actually rewrite this to make it look a little bit better. And that would make it look a little bit better, and it means the same thing. Moving on, 12 and A are both not being touched, so we will leave them outside. 4 is my index, and then B, C would go under the radical. And B and C both would have an exponent of 1, which we don't need to write. All right, a couple more here. So for this one, my 2 and B and the squared will go under, and then the 4 will be my index, and 3 is actually going to be an exponent for both of those items, so I can put that in parentheses and put it to the third power. Now what I see is that I'm actually going to be able to distribute that 3 in because it's an exponent for both of those, and I'm going to be able to simplify a little bit more. So if I were to write my final answer, it might look like this. My 4 would still be my index, but I would have 2 to the third power, because that 3 would be going into the 2. 2 to the third power is 8. And b to the second power, to the third power, if you remember back to your exponent rules, power of a power, this would be b to the 6th. And we would be done with that one. Last one here. This is going to be a similar situation. Our 3 is going to be our index, and then we'll have 8 and a to the second in the parentheses, and that's all going to be taken to the second power. So our final answer would be 8 squared is 64, and then a to the second would be a to the 4th, and that's my final answer. Okay, your homework. Oh, we actually have more. I'm sorry, I forgot about this. We will continue, I guess. Okay, so we're continuing by converting to exponential form. Okay, so this one would be going backwards from radicals to exponents. So for b, my exponent's going to be, well, we have to remember that the index went on the bottom for the denominator, so the 3 will go on top, and that's our answer for that. Moving on to the next one. This one's kind of tricky because we have to remember that this 5 is only touching d, so the c actually has its own exponent of a 1, so it'll be a 1 over 3 for the c, whereas for the d, let me try that again, it will be that 5 as its exponent and the 3 as the denominator of that exponent. This one here, they're both under, so let's put those in parentheses, the 5 and the h, and they both have that 1 as their exponent, and 2 would be listed there even though it's not shown. Continuing with 25. 25 is not in the radical, so we'll leave that up front. And then x will be taken to the 1/2 power, because there's a 2 as my index that you don't see, and a 1 as an exponent that you don't see. Okay, 98 is not being affected by the radical, so we'll leave that up front. And then d has an exponent of a 3, so that will be on the numerator, and then my denominator will be a 2 with that index. G will have a 1 over 2 because it's not being affected by that 3. There's the 12, and then the x will be 4 over 3. I'll rewrite that to make it look a little better. Next one. Since they're in parentheses, they're both being affected, so x and y will both have this exponent of 5 over 2. Next, we'll have x having a different exponent again this time because that 5 is not affecting it, so x will be to the 1/2 power, whereas y will be to the 5/2 power. And then for this one, a will be to the 8 over 4, and b will be to the 6 over 4. And this is a good time to remember that we can actually simplify those fractions as exponents. So our final answer would be a to the 2nd, because 8 divided by 4 is 2, and b to the 3/2 if we simplified that one. Okay, we're getting down to the ends here. Let's see. Now we are going back to radical form. So now we have our exponents. We're just going to go back to radical form, which means 6x would be inside, and the 1/2, the 2 would be our index, which you don't have to write, and 1 would be your exponent, which you don't have to write. And we are done. For this one, it's a little bit different because now the x is the only thing being affected, which means 6 stays out front. X goes inside. We don't need to write our index or our exponent because they're a 2 and a 1. 4 will go out front. Inside the radical, we'll have a and d. They're both being taken to the 1/2 power, so we won't have to write anything for them. For this one, 98 will be out front. It's not being affected by the 1/3 exponent. D will go there. 3 will be my index, and we are done. 13, A and B both go inside. 5 is your index, and 1 will be your exponents, which you don't have to write. Inside of this, we will have the 2x and y all being affected by this index of 4. Last couple here, it says rewrite them as a rational exponent and then simplify. So for this one, it will be a to the 6 over 3, and I'm just going to simplify that right away as a 2. B will be 12 over 3, which simplifies to a 4. C will be 9 over 3, which simplifies to a 3. For this one, we'll have W with 24 over 4, which is 6. X to the 1st, because 4 divided by 4 is 1, but I'm not going to write to the 1st power because we can assume that that would be there. And then Y to the 1/4 divided by 4. This is kind of tricky, but if you tried it on your calculator, 1/4 divided by 4 is 1/16. That is all of it, though. Thank you for watching. I've got an Alex topic listed there on the bottom. Good luck.